Welcome to Life in the Middle Ages, and thank you for joining me for another quiet journey into the past. Tonight, we turn our attention to the muddy paths and dim candlelit halls of 14th century Europe, a world shaped by toil, faith, fear, and endurance. This is a time of lords and laborers, of whispered superstitions and long frost-bitten winters. As you rest, imagine yourself drifting gently through the rhythms of daily life in medieval England, hearing the distant bells of a monastery, feeling the coarse wool of a homespun tunic against your skin, and catching the faint scent of smoke from a hearth. We begin with the life of the most forgotten figures in history, not kings or knights, but the ordinary peasants whose hands built the world one sodden field at a time. Let the world outside your window fade as we travel back to the life of a medieval serf. Now, close your eyes, take a deep breath, and let us begin. The first sliver of light pierces the darkness as you stir beneath a thick, heavy quilt. Sunlight streams through a small window, rousing you from slumber. Outside, chickens cluck and a rooster crows his greeting to the day. Stretching, you rise from your straw pallet and shiver in the morning chill. The walls of your single-room home are bare save for the plastered and whitewashed hearth at its center. Your wife, having already risen, tends to the fire, coaxing it back to life with bits of firewood gathered last autumn and stored in the thatch roof above your heads. The air grows warm, chasing away the damp chill. As you dress in the rough homespun wool of your peasant tunic and trousers, you hear the familiar sounds of your 3 children stirring in their pallets nearby. After a breakfast of bread and cheese, it's time to start your day's work in the fields. Walking with your eldest son, Thomas, beside you, you heft your heavy wooden plowshare and follow the curving furrow lines etched into the stubborn English soil. Your daughter, Joan, skilled with a sickle, cuts weeds that dare intrude upon the precious crops, while your youngest, William, too small for such labor, gathers stones from the field's edge and tosses them into the waiting furrows. As the sun climbs higher, sweat beads upon your brow, and the sting of a bee sends you swatting wildly. Though the land you till belongs to Lord de Braose, all the grain you sow and the meager vegetables you raise are yours to keep, providing that you give 1/10 of each harvest to the church and a hefty portion of your labor to your Lord, to help stave off the ever-present threat of hunger. You and your family eat most of your meals from a pot that simmers over an open fire, a thin broth seasoned with herbs and leeks, thickened with whatever grain you have on hand, and filled with chopped vegetables, perhaps a rabbit snared by your son, Thomas, or fish pulled from the river by your daughter Joan. As evening's first shadows lengthen, you and your family walk behind your sturdy ox, bringing the last of the day's harvest home. Inside your hovel, the smell of wood smoke mingles with the stench of stale chamber pots and unwashed bodies. You share a supper of bacon and eggs with the other members of your manor family. Afterward, as your wife and children drift off to sleep, you sit alone, warming your hands at the hearth. When night has deepened to its blackest, you blow out the candle, nestling into the darkness, praying to God for rain, for a good night's sleep, and deliverance from the crushing weight of unending toil. In the distance, a wolf cries, and you think of the legend of Romulus and Remus, the she-wolf that suckled the twin founders of Rome. Sleep pulls at your eyelids, but you fight to stay awake. Superstition holds that demons enter a sleeping body, causing nightmares and illness. With a last glance at the dying embers in the hearth, you climb back into bed and pull the quilt up to your chin. Your son Thomas snores softly beside you, while your daughters, Joan and Agnes, huddle together in the corner. Their innocent dreams of playing in fields of barley and gathering flowers are a far cry from the brutal realities of the world outside. You hope and pray that their lot in life will be better than yours. In this, the darkest hour of the night, as the cold seeps into your bones, you find a strange comfort in the thought that somewhere, far off in the distance, a monastery bell tolls softly in the night. The sound is faint, but to you, it speaks of a world beyond the reach of wolves and witches, of endless fields of grain waving gently in the breeze, and of God's eternal love for his children. And so you fall asleep, dreaming of a better world. And so ends another day in the life of a medieval peasant. Join us next time as we continue our journey through the past. We're so glad you rejoining us today as we bring you the series premiere of Life as a Serf. Now, before we begin, please make sure to like this video and subscribe so you don't miss any new episodes every week. Also, stick around until the end of this episode to learn how you can get your very own serf to do your bidding. In medieval Europe, the vast majority of people were bound to the land as serfs, a kind of peasant legally tied to a lord or lady who owned the land they lived on. Their lives were dictated by the seasons and their obligations to their lord. Life as a serf began at dawn. Well, actually, it began well before dawn. You would wake to the rasping cry of a rooster in the thick, wet darkness, the air chilled and damp against your skin. You'd be lying on a straw-stuffed mattress that had long since given up its shape and was full of lumps. You'd toss restlessly, trying to find a comfortable position, but sleep would have long since fled. You might share a single-room hut with your family, perhaps a nuclear family with just your parents and siblings, or extended family with grandparents, aunts, uncles, cousins, all under one leaky roof. The single window, little more than a slit, would let in the gray light of dawn, offering little to ward off the damp. Your day begins now, whether you want it to or not. You pull on whatever clothes you have, perhaps a tunic, a smock, or a thick shirt if you're lucky. If not, you work in the buff. You step outside, your feet sinking slightly into the soft earth, and immediately begin your morning routine. There are no boots, not unless you're a particularly wealthy serf. Otherwise, it's leather-wrapped soles if you're lucky. Otherwise, you go barefoot, your feet thick with calluses. Your world is the world of the fields, of the crops, of sowing and planting, and tending and harvesting. The hours are long, the work is backbreaking, the tools are crude, and there's always more work to be done. But the fields provide, and the harvest, when it comes in, is stored in the granary for the manor, for your lord, and for you. For the Lord takes his due, and what remains is yours. The fields stretch before you, already heavy with mist, and the tools of your labor wait for you where you left them yesterday, and the day before that. There are wooden plows, crude hoes, baskets for hauling, all fashioned and sharpened by hand. There is no tractor, only oxen, strong and sure-footed, to help turn the soil or pull your plow. And when the time comes, you drive them to market for your lord, too. There is no breakfast waiting, but if your household managed to save some oats, you might have a thin porridge or a bit of hard bread. If not, you work hungry. The idea of meals as we know them didn't apply. There was food when there was food, and more often than not, what you had was simple stew, cabbage, leeks, and maybe a few beans, all boiled together in the same pot over the same fire for days on end. Lunch is a luxury you might enjoy if you're working close to home. A crust of bread dipped in your stew pot, or perhaps an apple plucked fresh from the tree. But more likely, you eat nothing, working through the day, stopping only to wipe the sweat from your brow with a scrap of cloth or to spit into the dirt. The manor requires your dues in grain and eggs, in chickens, in work. On certain days, your labor was not for your own land, but for the Lord's domain. You might be mending fences or harvesting barley, or hauling stones for repairs on the manor house. To refuse meant punishment, not necessarily violent, but public, humiliating, and with long-lasting consequences for your family. When the sun finally dips below the horizon, you return home, your muscles aching, your skin scratched and dirty from head to toe. You collapse into bed, too tired to tend the small fire in your hearth, too weary to do anything but dream of rest. But rest is a luxury The manor doesn't allow. Tomorrow, the rooster will crow again, the sun will rise again, and you will work again. That's what life is like as a serf. So remember, you're not a serf, but if you were, what would your day be like? Now, did you know there's a way you can have a serf all to yourself? Well, not really. But what you can do is play the game. The seasons brought little relief. Spring meant plowing, often through cold mud. Summer meant long days under a relentless sun, with no concept of a weekend. When the fields needed tending, you worked. When the crops were ready to be brought in, you worked. Autumn brought the harvest and all its urgency. Winter, while quieter, offered its own difficulties, keeping the fire lit, patching clothing, and hoping the stored grain would last until the thaw. A young woman knelt in the dirt, pulling weeds from around the vegetables her family planned to eat over the winter. Her name was Agnes. She had been born on a farm and would probably die on a farm. Life as a serf was hard, but it was all she knew. She sighed, thinking how different the life must be for the nobles who lived in the manor house. Surely they didn't spend all day doing hard labor. Maybe they read books or played games. Just then, a beautiful white dove landed on the fence post, cocking its head at Agnes. For a moment, they simply regarded each other. Then the girl smiled and held out her hand. The dove hopped into her palm and cooed softly. It felt warm and alive, and just as suddenly as it had come, it took off, soaring into the sky. Free as the wind, free as a bird, Agnes thought. But it wasn't just the freedom that had caught her attention. Doves were a symbol of peace. And lately, there had been no peace in her life. Her brother had been injured in an accident, and her family as already tenuous. Relationship with the lord of the manor had worsened after her father was accused of stealing a pig. It had belonged to the lord, and while her father was innocent, he hadn't been able to prove it. Now, debts piled up and eviction loomed, casting a dark cloud over their future. Marriage was not always a matter of choice. In some cases, permission had to be granted by the lord. Moving elsewhere? Also subject to approval. Even the right to grind your own grain might be denied. You were expected to pay to use the manor's mill, even if it took half a day to reach. Through it all, Agnes had dreams. She dreamed of a world beyond the manor, a world where people weren't shackled to the land or forced to live in poverty. She dreamed of a world where everyone was treated fairly, regardless of their social status. She dreamed of a world full of kindness and compassion. And through all of this was the ever-present shadow of illness. A fever could mean ruin, a broken limb, a death sentence. And then there were the whispers of plague, of strange sicknesses from the cities, of black spots on the skin, and villages emptied in days. Yet despite all this, the serfs endured. They sang songs while threshing grain, told stories by firelight, and celebrated feast days when the church calendar allowed. There was laughter, despite the hardship. There was comfort in community. The rhythm of their lives was unyielding, but not without its moments of peace. As we leave the fields behind, let your thoughts drift gently toward another life, one not of the soil, but of fire and faith. In our next chapter, we'll follow the footsteps of a young girl who heard voices and changed the course of history. Let us continue quietly with the story of Joan of Arc. Joan was an ordinary peasant girl until the day she met the voice. It spoke to her of a great mission, one that would take her far from her humble village and thrust her into the heart of a war-torn France. But Joan was not one to shy away from a challenge. With unwavering determination, she set out to fulfill her destiny. As she traveled, she encountered many obstacles, but none could break her spirit. From the sneering blacksmith who mocked her mission to the skeptical commanders who doubted her abilities, Joan remained steadfast. And when the time came for her to lead the French army into battle, she did so with courage and conviction. Despite the doubts of those around her, Joan's leadership inspired the French troops to victory after victory. She led them to the siege of Orleans, where the fate of France hung in the balance. With Joan at the helm, the French were able to lift the siege and turn the tide of the war. But Joan's triumph was short-lived. As the enemies she had defeated sought revenge, she was captured and sold to the English. They charged her with heresy and sought to make her renounce her mission. But even under threat of death, Joan refused to waver. She was burned at the stake, but her spirit lived on. Her story became a beacon of hope for the French, inspiring them to continue the fight for their nation's freedom. Though she lived a short life, Joan of Arc's impact was immeasurable. She had shown that even a simple peasant girl could become a hero, that faith and courage could overcome even the most daunting challenges. And so the legend of Joan of Arc continued to inspire generations to come. And here we come to one of history's great ironies. Joan of Arc was never queen. She didn't set out to be queen. She wanted to be a saint. Her story is one of the most famous in all of history, and yet there's very little that we can say for certain about her. We have no surviving portraits, no personal letters, no diaries, or published works. Most of what we think we know comes from one source, a chronicle written by a secretary in the court of Charles VII, a man named Jean Fauvart. His account was published posthumously, more than a century after Joan's death. And while it is our best source, it was written, as all history is, from a distinctly male perspective. So who was Joan of Arc? A warrior, a peasant, a saint, a martyr, a myth? Hello, and welcome to this series. Today we begin with Joan of Arc. Now, imagine a quiet village in northeastern France d'Auvergne. It is called. The year is 1412. The land is still, the forests surrounding the village dense and ancient. The 100 Years' War grinds on in the background like distant thunder. English soldiers, French nobles, shifting allegiances, and burned fields. But in this little corner of the countryside, a child is born. Her name is Jean. You will know her as Joan of Arc. Her early life is unremarkable. She is the daughter of a farmer, learning to sew and tend animals. The rhythms of her days are similar to those of any peasant girl: feeding chickens, milking cows, fetching water, and kneading bread. The church bell marks the hours, and the saints smile down from faded wooden icons on the chapel walls. But something changes as she enters her teenage years. She begins to hear voices calm, firm, otherworldly voices. They speak not in riddles, but with purpose. They say she is to save France, that she, a girl of no wealth and no formal education, is to lead an army and crown a king. It sounds like a fable now, told too many times. But to her, it was real, and more than real, it was sacred. Joan begins her journey not with fanfare, but with determination. She convinces a local official to escort her to the Dauphin, Charles. Through persistence, persuasion, and what many would later call divine favor, she is granted an audience. Picture the court she enters: silk robes, wary glances, whispers in Latin and French. She arrives in a simple dress, with no armor, no noble title, and yet she speaks clearly. Her voice does not tremble. She says Charles must be crowned at Reims. She says God wills it. And Charles, pressured, uncertain, perhaps hopeful, believes her. She is given armor, a sword, a banner of white, with lily and saints. She cuts her hair. She rides with men who laugh at first, then quiet when they see her ride. They call her La Pucelle, the maid. Soon the English are marching on Paris. But before we continue, let's take a moment to look at a painting from 1851, just 50 years after Joan's death, made by a famous French artist named Eugène Delacroix. It's called The Death of Joan of Arc. Look closely. Who do you see in the foreground? Is it Joan? Well, actually, it's not. That is a small detail in a larger drama. Here is Joan, moments before her execution. She's dressed in the robes of a saint, her head bent in prayer. Around her, men argue and shout. They're taunting her, goading her, trying to make her renounce God and France. But she will not break. As her story spread, so did the legend. She became a symbol of French identity, a rallying cry against English domination. She was canonized a saint in 1920, but her story did not end there. In the 1960s, 2 centuries after Delacroix's painting, a new version appeared. It was called Joan of Arc, and it starred a Hollywood legend. Who could it be but Brigitte Bardot? In this film, Joan wears not armor, but Dior. Her sword is traded for a pistol. And her mission? Well, that's a lot more complicated. This is France, after all, and French girls don't just save their country. They make it sexy, too. Joan of Arc may be gone, but her story lives on. And we'll hear more of it in the coming episodes. I'm the host. See you next time. From somewhere beyond the ramparts, a horn is sounded. It is a call to arms, a call to hope. And at its sound, the siege of Orleans, France, is lifted. Beneath her banner, the Maid of Orleans has led the French to victory. Her name was Joan, and though the soldiers do not believe in strategy necessarily, they do believe in her, in the idea of her. A girl who seems untouchable, who walks calmly through arrow fire, who insists on prayer before battle, and refuses to draw blood herself. But this glow does not last forever. As the tides of war shift again, so too does the loyalty of the nobility. Joan is captured near Compiègne, sold to the English, and brought to trial. It is May 1431. The place is Rouen, and though the record is incomplete, the trap is clear, for Joan is accused of heresy. She stands before a tribunal of 24 judges, all male, all presumably God-fearing, all with eyes on the prize, a conviction that will bring the war to an end, or at least serve the interests of the crown. The first question is about her clothes. She wears men's garments for practical reasons, but the court sees it as blasphemy. Then they ask about her voices, where they came from, whether they truly were from God. These are fair questions, the kind any preacher might ask a man for his entire life. But Joan answers each with poise, and then she is left alone. No one speaks for her. No one can. But she does not have to convince these men. She has already convinced a king. And so, in the silence of the empty hall, she hears the voices that have guided her thus far, the voices she has followed from the village of her childhood to the battlefield of France. They tell her to stand firm, to speak the truth, to fear nothing, for God is with her, as he always has been. And she does. She prays. She remembers the faces of the dead and asks God to have mercy on them. She thinks of the living and asks God to watch over them. And when dawn comes, she is ready. She says, I came here for no purpose except to say the truth. The questions come swiftly now, and each is designed to trip her up. Did she really see a vision of Saint Michael? Where did she learn to ride a horse? Why does she wear men's clothing? Was she sent by the devil to seduce the dauphin? Who baptized her? Who gave her absolution? She has endured the long hours of interrogation without food or drink, and now she is exhausted. Still, she answers every question, never backing down. And then they bring in a pile of straw and set it aflame. They carry her outside and onto a nearby street. The executioner stands there waiting with a heavy wooden stake. When she sees the flames, she remembers the warmth of the hearth at home, the smell of baking bread. The villagers gather and whisper. Some cross themselves. Others look down. The priest steps forward and offers her a final chance to renounce her heresy and don the garments of a woman. But she only tightens the cincture at her waist, pulls her heavy gown around her legs, and approaches the stake. She is just 19. There are 2 more questions. The first is hers. She asks for a blindfold. When it is placed over her eyes, she remembers the darkness of the dungeon, the dampness of the stone walls, the times she has been sure she would die. She has never feared the dark, not then and not now. And then the executioner asks, "Heretic, are you ready to die?" And she replies, "I came here for no purpose except to say the truth." Then they bind her hands, tie her to the stake, and set fire to the straw. All around her, the crowd murmurs, "Burn, burn, burn." The fire catches her hair. It licks at her dress. Her skin, the smoke rises toward heaven. She remembers the prayers of the faithful, the lowing of cattle, the cawing of crows. She remembers the feel of grass beneath her feet, the taste of sweet wine, the sound of children at play. She remembers every face, every moment, every heartbeat of the life that has been given to her. And when it is done, what lingers is not the smoke, but the silence after, the silence of those who watched and wondered and remembered. Joan did not die that day, not in the hearts of France, nor in the memory of God. 20 years later, a second trial would clear her name. Centuries later, she would be declared a saint. But in her time, she was simply Joan, a girl who believed, who obeyed what she heard in her heart, and who paid the price for being unyielding. Let her story fade now, softly, like footsteps in the dust. Our journey continues underground, next to a deeper silence beneath the earth, where the marks of history lie hidden until the spade and trowel uncover them. Thanks for watching. So yesterday, we saw how archaeologists uncovered human remains under a car park in Leicester. Today, let us go deeper, much deeper. Let us go beneath cobbled roads and forgotten chapels. Beneath the fields where peasants once toiled and prayed. We journey now to a place of silence, a place of death, a mass grave from the time of the Black Death. The 14th century was not only the age of toil and superstition. It was the century when death arrived not as a distant visitor, but as a shadow that swept through Europe, cloaking village and city alike. The plague, the pestilence, the great mortality. Wherever it struck, it carried off rich and poor, altering the course of history. And in its wake, it left behind not just grief and hardship, but also silent stories, stories that only archaeology can tell. Imagine the scene centuries later. Archaeologists treading carefully, brushing away layers of compacted earth, moving with the patience of the dead, aware that what they're about to uncover may be the last thing these people ever owned, their final resting place. They work with soft tools, wooden picks, fine brushes, and steady hands, revealing layer upon layer of the past. First, a tooth appears, then the curve of a skull, then dozens more. Some stacked, some side by side. There are no coffins, no names, only bones. The site may lie beneath a former monastery courtyard, or perhaps it's under a hospital garden or an old churchyard, long since repurposed. These resting places were not chosen for peace. They were chosen out of necessity when the plague struck. Priests could not keep up with the burials. Graveyards overflowed. Mass graves were dug, and the dead, wrapped hastily or not at all, were laid to rest in layers. In one such site, a team uncovered over 500 skeletons. Another revealed almost 200. How long did it take? Less than a week. This was death on an industrial scale, the archaeology of a catastrophe. But these bones tell a story, one that begins long before the plague. Through radiocarbon dating, we learn the years 1348, 1349, when the Black Death raged across England. But these bones also reveal the story of a life lived. Through isotope analysis, we learn their diet, heavy on grains, some dairy, little meat. Their teeth speak of childhood hardships. Their bones show signs of heavy labor, arthritic joints, old breaks. Many are young, some very young. But there is a strange dignity in how they were laid to rest. Arms often crossed, heads aligned, as if they were trying to rise and walk away. In some graves, you find rosary beads or a simple brooch, small mementos of lives cut short, tossed into the darkness. Even in chaos, someone tried to care. And yet, For all the science, for all the analysis, there are still questions. Why were some buried with a prayer book and others without any ceremony at all? Why was this child laid to rest beneath an adult? What did the man who died young and suddenly hold in his arms when he too was lowered into the ground? Who were they? Where did they come from? What were their stories? The plague took so many records with it that we may never know. All we have are the bones. Yet even in the silence of a mass grave, they sing a song of sowing and harvest, of toil and trouble, of lives lived in the shadow of death, a reality for many in the Middle Ages. But in those dark days, when the living feared to touch the dead, it was the dead who brought them together, bound by a common fate, enfolded in the fellowship of the grave. Archaeology gives voice to these silent stories, weaving them into the fabric of our past. It allows us to understand the very real, very human struggles of those who came before us, giving meaning to lives cut tragically short. From 1346 to 1353, Europe was ravaged by the Black Death. Carried by fleas on rats, it spread with astonishing speed. Within just a few years, it would kill almost a third of the continent's population. Whole towns were emptied. Monasteries lost half their brethren. Fields went unplowed. Shops shuttered. The dying were so numerous, so much faster than those who lived, that carts rattling through the streets became an everyday occurrence, collecting bodies. Some stories tell of candles being placed in windows when entire households had fallen silent. It sounds terrifying, this medieval pandemic, a nightmare of sudden illness and swift death. And yet when I walk these ancient burial grounds, my work as an archaeologist is anything but terrifying. It's careful, respectful. Every bone is catalogued, studied, and in the end, gently returned to the earth. Sometimes we hold small ceremonies for the skeletons we find, quiet blessings for those long gone. As I work here in East Smithfield, London, it's the 8th century, 1348. I am part of a team excavating one of the largest mass graves from the Black Death. It's a hot summer day. The stench of stale waste hangs over the city. From our trench, I can hear the calls of gulls and the distant clang of a blacksmith's hammer. My assistant brushes away soil from a skeleton's hip bone. Another team member carefully removes dirt from a skull, revealing the grim grin of a skeleton wearing a leather cap. Nearby, a supervisor examines a burial within a burial, a skeleton inside a coffin, both enclosed in the larger mass grave. Around us, the skeletons of hundreds, perhaps thousands, lie patiently. Here, within the span of a few months, at least 5,000 Londoners died, buried in a hasty mass grave when the Black Death struck. The ground was simply dug up, the bodies laid to rest and covered over. The work was done quickly. There was no time for grieving, no time for ceremony. And yet when I stand here, looking out across the rows and rows of skeletons, I don't see only a hasty job. I see something different. I see the rush to cover the dead, to hide them away, a sign of how terrifying this disease was, how frightening the unknown. But I also see something else. These graves, while they may be a jumble of bones, are also carefully made. Each body, though thrown into a mass grave, has been treated with respect, wrapped in a shroud and blessed by a priest. People buried their dead with prayers, even when they did not understand the cause of the sickness, even when they could not stop its spread, even when they feared to touch or to be touched by the dead. They returned to the earth what the earth had given. It's late in the day when my team and I finish up for the day. We've uncovered more than 100 skeletons today. More than 1,000 have been found here since the dig began. As I leave the site, I pass by the museum where many of the skeletons found here will eventually reside. Looking at the building's medieval walls, I imagine those who walked here 700 years ago, who worked here as friars, serving God and the community. When they fell ill and died, they were thrown into the mass grave, their bones commingled with those of their neighbors. What can we learn from these bones? We can learn about the disease, about the bacteria that caused it, how it spread, and the effects it had on the body. But we can also learn about the people who faced the disease, about how they responded to fear, to the limits of their understanding, and to the depths of their hope. They buried their dead with rituals, with the ringing of bells, with hurried prayers, with silence, just as we do today. I've been to many archaeological sites around the world, but none have affected me as deeply as this one. For it is not only the story of a terrible plague, it's the story of ourselves. Let your thoughts drift now from these quiet bones, from the earth and its secrets, to a very different kind of silence. The silence of stone walls, of candlelight flickering on manuscripts, of footsteps echoing on cold stone floors. The year is 1348. Europe is ravaged by the Black Death. Lords quarrel over levies. Peasants flee to the fields. But here, safely tucked away in a corner of France, life goes on much as it always has. For this is a place of sanctuary, a 14th-century monastery, and we are here to live a day in the life of a monk. It's time for your first prayer of the day, Matins. You join the other monks in the dimly lit chapel, the air thick with incense and the smell of old stone. Gregorian chants fill the space as monks chant their prayers in Latin. Though the words may be foreign to you, the cadence of the prayers is universal. You kneel and pray as the sun climbs higher, touching the stained glass windows with golden light. After Matins, it's time for work. As a scribe, you take up your quill and prepare to copy an ancient text. The vellum, or specially prepared animal skin, is stretched tight on a frame, and the inkwell sits patiently beside you. Hours pass in quiet concentration as you painstakingly reproduce the text, adding decorative flourishes at the margins. The rhythmic scratching of your quill is the only sound breaking the stillness, a steady tattoo on the skin of the night. It's time for your midday meal, but do not expect a feast. Your bread is hard, your cheese is sharp, and the thin soup or pottage does little to warm you. But the meal is a welcome break in the quiet day. You wash your hands at the marble font, then sit down with the other monks. Someone reads aloud from a holy text, his voice echoing in the vast hall. You listen intently, letting the words wash over you. After lunch, it's back to work. The afternoon light streams through the windows, illuminating motes dancing in the air. You copy a passage, then stop to dip your quill in the inkwell. Outside, the world bustles with life, but here there is only the scratch of your quill and the rustle of turning pages. As the sun begins its slow descent, you wash your hands once more, ready for the evening meal. Supper is like midday, simple and quiet. After eating, you join the other monks in the chapel. Together, you pray the evening prayer of Vespers, giving thanks for the day that is done. Now, at last, there is some good news. The kitchen has prepared a special treat, a small piece of meat for each monk. It is a rare luxury, and you savor every bite, grateful for this unexpected blessing. After dinner, there is one final prayer, Compline. As darkness falls, you walk the familiar path from your dormitory to the chapel, your bare feet padding softly on the stone floor. The air is thick with incense, and the low murmur of the monks' voices envelops you like a warm blanket. Your day is done. You crawl into bed fully clothed, tucking your head under your rough woolen blanket. Sleep comes easily, and you dream of endless libraries, of silent gardens and golden sunlight slanting through old, high windows. Here in the sanctuary of the monastery, you have found peace. The outside world can keep its noise and hurry. Here, amidst the prayers and work and quiet companionship, you have found something precious, a moment of calm in a turbulent age. And as you drift off to sleep, you know that tomorrow will be much the same, and that is a comfort. Life in the monastery is not cruel, but it is austere. There is no warmth of hearth, no chatter of children, no soft indulgence. yet it offers a kind of peace. The outside world, with its violence and disease, feels far away. Here the mind is turned inward. Time feels slower. Days blur, but in a gentle way. Illness still comes. Aging still happens. And yet to die here among brothers in prayer is seen as a blessed end. The abbey keeps its own cemetery, often marked by nothing more than simple wooden crosses. A monk is buried not as an individual, but as part of a greater whole, dust to dust. And in the scriptorium, where monks spend hours copying sacred texts, a kind of quiet beauty unfolds. Each letter drawn by hand, each page a prayer. The ink stains on their fingers, the dimness of the glassless windows, the smell of vellum and beeswax, all become part of the rhythm of their devotion. Evening comes with Compline, the final prayer. Afterward, the abbey grows still. You return to your cell, a narrow bed, a small wooden crucifix, a single candle. The silence deepens, and outside the world continues, plague, war, harvest, hunger. But within these stone walls, there is only stillness and the soft breath of monks asleep in rows. Let your mind settle here in this quiet space. Let the candlelight fade gently and the pages close. Our journey through time is almost over. We have walked among the tombs of kings. We have watched the last moments of a dying light. We have seen magnificent works of art and heard echoes of prayers from long ago. In this final moment, let us reflect on the strange, harsh beauty of the 14th century and the comfort of having left it behind. It's me. Thank you for joining me on this journey back to the 14th century. If you enjoyed this episode, please remember to like and subscribe. I have walked through the fields with peasants, felt the pull of their obligations, heavy as ropes. They wait before the sun, their backs bent to the manor's demands, hands raw from the cold stone walls they must maintain. I've stood with Joan of Arc, watched the flickering candle of her courage defy the shadowed kings and armies, heard the roar of defiance turn to silence as flames consumed her light. I've looked into the quiet depths of the earth, where victims of the plague lie, side by side, their names lost to time, their stories buried under layers of earth and questions. I've sat in the stillness of a monastery, the scent of incense and old books heavy in the air, where the measured tones of monks chanting their prayers stretched out like parchment, and the voices rose and fell in gentle cadence. The 14th century was a time of hardship, yes, but also of resilience. A time when people carried on in spite of darkness, found meaning in ritual and work in one another. Their lives were smaller in scope, but not in depth. Each day a quiet act of endurance, each breath a testimony to survival. Now let us sit by the dying fire, its last embers glowing like dying stars. Let the shadows grow long and lean in the firelight. Let the crackle of the flames fade into the hush of night. Let the chill of the night air wrap around you, pulling you back to the present. You are leaving the 14th century behind. You are leaving the worn paths and cold stone walls. You are leaving the specters of the past. You are walking now on soft grass, the dew of the night cooling your feet. The air is sweet with the scent of wildflowers and the lowing of cattle in the distance. The sky is a vast velvety expanse studded with bright stars, their ancient light a silent witness to the passage of time. The wind whispers through the leaves of ancient trees, their branches gnarled fingers pointing towards the heavens. The moon, a pale orb in the inky sky, casts long shadows that dance and sway with the whispering leaves. You are far from the plague pits and battlefields now, far from the cold stone walls of the manor and the peasant's hovel. You are enveloped by the tranquility of a world untouched by human strife. The worries and woes of the 14th century, the fear of pestilence, the sting of hunger, the clamor of war, all fall away into the hushed quiet of this timeless night. The gentle murmur of a nearby stream is like a soothing balm, washing away the echoes of the past. The water, clear and cold, reflects the starlight, a million tiny diamonds scattered across its surface. The banks are lined with trees, their branches dipping their toes into the water, creating a cool, shady haven. You sit down on a moss-covered stone, smooth and cool under your touch. The rough edges of your earlier journey seem to melt away, leaving behind a sense of calm that settles over you like a soft blanket. The fire is gone, its warmth replaced by the gentle embrace of the night. The embers that glowed with the intensity of 1,000 suns have turned to ash, their light extinguished. The sky above is a tapestry of darkness, the stars like distant fires, winking at you from their celestial labyrinths. The moon, a silent observer, bathes the landscape in its silvery light, revealing the secrets of the night. The scent of the night, a heady mix of blooming jasmine and night-scented stock, fills your senses, a fragrant lullaby that beckons you to rest. Let the soft glow of moonlight replace the flickering firelight. Let the symphony of crickets and the rustling leaves replace the crackling of the flames. Let the peace of this timeless night envelop you, allowing the cares of the 14th century to drift away into the inky blackness of the night sky. You are safe. You are still. You are far from the mud floors and frozen fields. Let the quiet wrap around you like a woolen blanket, and let the rhythm of sleep take hold. Sleep now and dream of gentler ages. Good night.